archaeologists around Britain have been doing a new kind of historical research. They've been studying the fascinating traces of our past that are discovered when the tide is out.
They include prehistoric footprints, lost villages, shipwrecks, and the fragmentary remains of once important industries now abandoned. And the key thing is, we can see them now, but they won't last forever.
Every year, coastal erosion reveals more and more evidence. But at the same time, it tears down our cliffs, and many of our most valued historical remains are under threat.
Before we lose this vital evidence, we're going to visit key sites around Britain, record them for posterity, and investigate the compelling stories that lie behind them.
I'm joining my colleagues from CITiZAN, the Coastal and Inter-tidal Zone Archaeological Network. Together we'll discover the wonderful clues to how our coastal forebears survived.
I don't get the impression this is a well-worn route.
This week, we're in the south of England, on a stretch of coast that's been key to Britain's success, both as a trading nation and as a naval power. We'll be exploring a prehistoric marvel.
It is just an incredible feat of engineering.
The original width.
We'll unravel one of the 18th century's most disastrous construction projects.
Here.
I mean, what on earth were they thinking? And so what we can see here is...
And we discover a shipwreck that takes us back to the age of European empire building.
A smell from over 250 years ago.
The stretch of coast we're interested in lies in the county of East Sussex. It's famous for its white chalk cliffs and rolling downland. Its defining feature is change. Rising sea levels, coastal erosion and sudden storm surges mean that these are cliffs that are constantly reshaping. Beneath them, powerful currents lead to shifting sands and silts. These have always posed a threat to our vital trade links across the world. And one persistent problem has been how to stop harbours clogging up with silt. And it's that issue that's brought us to Winchelsea Beach.
The movement of sand and shingle on any coast is a problem, but it's a particular problem here because what you need is to prevent the sediment blocking the harbour entrance and infilling the harbour basin is to have a flow of fresh water, or a flow of water, hopefully fresh, pushing that sediment out into the open channel. So it's a battle between fresh water moving everything out and salt water trying to bring sediment in.
That all makes sense. I don't see much evidence of a harbour at all.
Well, in actual fact, you can see the ghostly remnants of it running through here.
So you say it's a bit of a harbour?
Yep, we're
Not
looking at
much
the eastern end of Smeaton's harbour. So what we're looking at is an 18th century engineering project, a very grand engineering project, to open up a new harbour for the town of Rye.
Rye? Rye's quite a long way that way, isn't it?
It is.
It's along the coast, and it's inland.
This is quite a confusing story. It appears the old town of Rye is 3 miles away. It had been a hugely successful seaport, made wealthy by trade with Europe. At its peak in the 1500s, as many as 300 vessels might be seen in the harbour. But in 1727, when it was clearly losing its battle with silt, work started on a new deep water harbour over at Winchelsea Beach.
So is this a section of the harbour wall?
Where we are would have been the new harbour's eastern pier.
This part is made of wood. Gus is modelling for you the line of the eastern pier, and then we have a return or a dogleg pier, but it's angled.
Angled round,
It's
so
angled
that the
round.
wall of the harbour's angled round here.
That's right.
What's the reason for that?
So it protects your harbour entrance, and it also creates a deeper, faster flowing channel for the scour to flush the sediment out.
So this is the mouth of the channel coming in, and then
over there, those uprights represent the western pier.
there's not much of it left.
What's left of it?
What's left of it? There's not much left.
The reason it's in worse condition is because this is the side that faces the weather. This is
Right.
where all the storms, winds and rage comes from. So we call this the weather pier.
It's not here now. Was it ever a successful harbour?
No, Tori, it wasn't really a successful harbour. I mean, this thing took 63 years to put together and to build, and it's a total cost in today's money of £20 million. So in July 1787, it was finally opened, and by November, it was closed.
4 months.
4 months.
4 months later.
Yep.
That's an expensive endeavour for not much harbour opening time.
It's, yes.
What on earth were they thinking?
It turns out we were standing on the site of one of the greatest engineering fiascos of the 18th century. So what did this expensive folly look like? And how could so many decades of work end in such spectacular failure after just a few weeks? We'll follow up on this a little later. As the sea silts up the coast, it also tears down its fragile cliffs.
The opposing processes of deposition and erosion have caused massive changes to this stretch of southeastern coastline, creating vast sandbanks and salt marshes in some places, and then snatching away huge chunks of cliffs in others. This lot came down the last few days following a storm.
Further along the coast at Burling Gap, Oliver is investigating a very mysterious archaeological feature that was only revealed after cliff falls in the 1970s. He's meeting up with local archaeologist Joe Seaman.
Hi, Joe. That's a nice rock pool. What have you got there?
It's actually the base of a rather enigmatic feature. As you can see, it's almost perfectly circular. It's about 1 metre across, but it does appear to be the base of a shaft that once was cut right the way through this cliff, all the way down to here.
A shaft through what I assume is cliffs are no longer here, but I mean, that's huge. We're sort of looking 35, 40 metres, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And in the 1970s, there were a series of rockfalls around here, and they exposed that shaft in section. I've actually got some photos here.
Wow.
It pretty consistently runs right the way through the cliff, about 1 metre wide, all the way down, apart from the very top.
That's amazing. What are these little holes that...
Yeah, again, this sort of proves that this is a humanly cut feature, is that there are footholes all the way down it. So someone at some stage has cut this incredibly deep feature right the way through the cliff.
How on earth do you cut something that size?
It can't have been easy, cutting through chalk and then going through seams of flint, sort of 40, 50 centimetres deep, and really, really cramped, claustrophobic, especially when you got to the bottom. Imagine being at the bottom of a hole, looking up, with virtually no air and this pinprick of light. It would have been absolutely terrifying.
Actually, it would.
But yeah, I mean, it's just an incredible feat of engineering.
This unique structure poses many questions. Is it hundreds or even thousands of years old? And just why would local people have worked so hard to tunnel down into this chalk? That's what we're going to investigate. What destroys one piece of archaeological evidence reveals another. Around the corner from Smeaton's harbour is a place called Pett Level, where erosion has revealed a submerged forest that flourished at least 4,000 years ago. CITiZAN's Lara Band and Stephanie Ostrich have invited along some younger volunteers to help them try to find trees under the sand and seaweed.
Is it just the sheer extent of the forest that makes it so special?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it stretches that way, stretches 2 kilometres around there, which is really, really exciting.
Trees, you can see trees all the way around?
Yep, carries on that way along the peat shelf. It's also the size of the trees. We've got this monster in front of us.
It's enormous.
And the thing that's really nice about this one, it's a really good example. You can see this end.
Yeah.
You see it sort of flaring out here. You can give it a bit of a wash so you can actually see the wood.
Yeah.
And you can see spreading out. So that's probably the root end.
And then this is the trunk up this way.
Yeah.
It's quite a
Going that
long
way.
trunk as well, isn't it?
It is.
Can you imagine it being quite a big tree?
Yeah. So another thing we can tell with some of the trees, at least, is whether it's an oak or not an oak. That's a start.
Oh, okay.
Because if you press it, oak is very hard. If it's soft, it's not an oak.
Oh, wow, that's squishy.
That's squishy. That's not an oak.
Oh, so we've got a very large not oak.
Yep, a very large not oak. We could attempt to find an oak.
Most of the forest seems to have thrived from around 3000 BC to about 1700 BC. This was a time when the landscape looked very different. Elsewhere, people were building stone circles and henges.
So each new form you do for each new tree.
Here, the shoreline would have been 3 kilometres further out, and the sea level could have been as much as 5 or 6 metres lower than it is today.
You can tell it's oak because it's super hard, right?
Can you really imagine a forest here? No. Isn't it lucky I've brought a picture to show you? This is a picture of what they think the forest looked like. So you can see in the background, you've got the cliff, and you can see you've got all the trees. You've got a deer in there. We know there was mice here as well because they found a hazelnut which had tooth marks on it from a mouse.
The forest would have been quite damp, and with a wide variety of trees. As well as oak, there were alder, ash, and yew.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to go and record some trees. I've got some forms here. We want to know the site name. I'm going to give you a tree number so we know which tree we've recorded and whether it's a trunk or a branch. So, and then how long it is.
A bit more like roots.
Yeah, I think.
Quite solid.
I mean, it's a bit difficult to see because there's so much seaweed on it. So yeah, we can brush away the seaweed.
This is definitely a tree. It might be an oak.
Yeah, maybe. I
Excellent,
found
thank you.
this a bit submerged
Oh,
in
wow.
the clay and everything,
at that.
and it's still really hard, so I'm not sure what type of tree it could be.
Oh, it's very knotty, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I think it might be a bit of root, actually.
With the wood, why don't you take it away to make sure it doesn't like get damaged?
Well, actually, it's probably better to leave it in, what we call it in situ, because it's actually being protected by the sand.
CITiZAN was founded in 2015. Its mission is not only to record endangered coastal remains around the country, but also to encourage the public to get involved. Today, they are hoping to inspire a new generation of archaeologists.
Take first.
How many trees did you find?
We did find about two
found about,
oak trees
like,
and quite a lot of
six.
soft ones.
6, 7.
Yeah, about the same.
Overall, we got 6 or 7, but there were less oak trees. But we found this one that was like 7 meters 25. It was absolutely humongous.
Now that I've actually seen what to do and get to mess around with stuff, it's actually very fun.
Yeah, don't sound so surprised.
Pet Level is a striking example of how coastal erosion can quite suddenly put us in touch with prehistory. The children here are walking amongst trees that predate them by at least 4,000 years. We've been investigating Smeaton's vanished harbour. We know that it was designed to revive the ancient port of Rye. In the Middle Ages, Rye had been important because it had to supply ships and men to the king's navy. But Rye was always fighting a battle against silt. By 1698, the navy had decided that it was no longer fit for purpose. This was a severe blow to Rye. Britain was expanding its empire, and ports that could service both trade and the navy were at a premium.
The problem they had, well, still have along this coastline, is something called longshore drift. Now, that's when you get sediment like sand or indeed shingle being carried by a current that runs parallel to the coast. And then you get an onshore wind that pushes that sediment towards the shore. It all adds up to a dynamic, changeable coastline. New deposits get laid down, new banks of sand or shingle. It's a nightmare for keeping your harbour clear.
Down at Winchelsea Beach, we're trying to work out the exact position and dimensions of Smeaton's harbour and what caused it to spectacularly fail. With the help of a drone, Pete Rokeslow is taking hundreds of still photos, each from a different angle, to make a precise digital record of the site.
So, Pete, we know that the drone survey is going to show us what Smeaton's harbour would have looked like, but will it give us any idea of why it failed?
Yes, I think it will, because what we'll generate is a very detailed 3D model of the beach and the different heights between where the sea is now, the shingle, and the coast towards Rye.
Pete is planning to survey not only the remains of the piers on the beach, but also this field, where it's believed the main docking area once stood. Today, it's known as Harbour Field. This football pitch would have been full of water, and the roads on either side are where it's thought the quays were. Hopefully, Pete will be able to confirm whether this was the site of the harbour in 1787. The 18th century was a period of massive expansion in trade between Europe and the rest of the world. Harbours increased in size, as did the merchant ships that used them. I'm heading now for a beach near Hastings. Hive was where an 18th century sailing ship called the Amsterdam was wrecked on the 26th of January 1749. Owned by the Dutch East India Company, the world's first multinational, this brand new ship was a state-of-the-art trading vessel bound for Indonesia. I'm meeting up with Dutch archaeologist Jerzy Gawronski and archaeologist and historian Peter Marsden.
Peter, you said this is the best preserved East Indiaman, but all I can see is a few bits of wood sticking out. Like, it looks like it's the edge. Is it the edge, the top of it?
You have to go down over between 20 and 30 feet to find the bottom. It's deeper at the stern. So it's buried. It's just an outline here.
What you in fact see is two different levels of the ship. On this side, that's the level of the upper gun deck.
Right.
But here on this side, you see the last bits of the lower gun deck.
So it's tilted?
The ship is tilted.
Tilted that way, that's it.
And you can see it pointing that way, right? Okay,
and
so it's tilted.
the bow is higher than the stern, because the stern is indicated there with a pin sticking out.
Okay.
So that's the limit of the stern area.
How did the ship get here? What's the story behind it landing here in the first
Well,
place?
it was a very unfortunate... It was a maiden voyage, built in Amsterdam in 1748. And it was left the north of Holland, but waiting for 2 months. It was in winter with fierce southwesterly gales.
She was in this storm, a terrible storm here, lost her rudder off Beachy Head, and Captain Clump just had to beach the ship. A lot of people were dying on board from fever.
Without a rudder as well?
Without a rudder.
The ship went adrift, went up, and then got stuck. And the ship, in 3 months' time, sank away 7 meters deep and came to rest on the bedrock. All the provisions, the personal belongings, everything shifted to this side and is like a pie waiting there to be excavated and tell us about the past.
Although the ship's cargo and all the belongings of the crew and passengers had been buried 7 or 8 meters down in the hull, Jerzy did have a brief chance to carry out some very limited excavations in the 1980s.
Underneath that sand, only after a meter, you find organic material like seeds and pollen and pieces of textile. And it gives you a very broad picture of the material culture. And this bottle is an archaeological object and comes from the ship.
Yeah, this is a red, and we think probably Bergerac. Now, you can smell it.
Right.
It's been fortified, 21% proof, 21% proof, to preserve it for the long journey. But there, a smell from over 250 years ago.
Wow! I was not expecting it to still smell like wine. That's incredible.
This ship is a time capsule.
It really is.
It's a microcosmos of society. This ship deserves to be better treated than sitting here in the beach, because it's a mine of information.
there were over 300 people on board at the time of the shipwreck. All but the 50 who had already died of fever safely disembarked. I'm left wondering what this incredible ship looked like. What other precious cargo was in its hold? And what happened to it before it sank into the beach? One effect of a highly mobile shoreline is that human-made structures that were once on the coast can eventually find themselves some distance inland. The town of Rye is an example. But the shaft at Burling Gap demonstrates that the opposite can also be true. We're still trying to establish how old it is and why the local people went to so much trouble to dig it out. Oliver has found an archaeologist with a theory.
Here we are then, Mike. This is what we're here for.
Yep.
You're very much the man to tell me about this because you've had quite a long history with this feature in its various forms.
Yes, I remember seeing this as a student. I was brought out to it. Archaeologists would look at this huge shaft in the cliff, and it was a great thing to come and see.
I mean, obviously, we're very curious to know how old it is, but what archaeological evidence can we use for that?
There are a number of things we can do. For instance, when the shaft was here, it was exposed in the cliff section. It was full of soil. If you can get samples of that, soil samples of that, you can get little snails out of it. Now, you know about snails. You know, you've seen the big one in your garden, the Roman snail, eating your lettuces and things. But most snails are a tad smaller than that. The snails I look at are, well, these are big ones. These are very, very big, but some of them are much, much smaller. So why am I interested in these? Well, different species live in different habitats. Some will live in long grass, some live in short grass. If it's short grass, it's been grazed. And if we have evidence from 6 or 7 samples I took from here, I went over the edge of the cliff on a rope. I am petrified of heights, but by grabbing those soil samples, we were able to tell that this was grazed downland.
How can we use these snails to tell us about the date of our feature?
Well, we can't date features with land snails. They don't give us a date, but they can give us clues. So, for instance, the Roman snail came in the Roman period, and that's your common garden snail, and a number of other little incy-wincy snails came over in the medieval period. The downs up there are covered with them. There are hundreds, thousands of them up there. When I went over the cliff and collected my samples of soil, I've analysed those snails, and I've got hundreds of snails out of there. Not one of them is medieval. Therefore, I surmise that the shaft infilled before the medieval period. Also, there wasn't any Roman snails, so we're hinting at perhaps it predates the Roman period.
What Mike believes the snails suggest is that the shaft filled up with earth, and therefore snails, before the Romans arrived in Britain. So that takes us back to at least the early 1st century AD. But does he have any other evidence that might secure a date?
This stuff here is the gold. These are twigs of wood that have been growing up on the downs and have fallen down the shaft and survived as waterlogged material. We can radiocarbon date those, and we've radiocarbon dated 3 of those.
Of course.
And we have a date, and the date is 1,000 years BC.
OK, so that's late Bronze Age.
That's 3,000 years ago and late Bronze Age. That is prehistoric. It means that prehistoric people were cutting this shaft purposefully to get the water, to water their cattle, to water their sheep up on the top of the downs.
If you're suggesting then that we're looking at a well, a Bronze Age well, shall we have a closer look and see what it is that we're seeing?
I came back here to excavate it, and I expected this to come down onto clay underneath the chalk, and that would be what would be holding the water of the well. But actually, we came back down here and excavated this. There is the bottom. You can probably just hear that scraping sound. That's the bottom. So that's how deep we are. In the past, the whole landscape was very different. The water table would have been metres up the cliff, which meant from the top it had been dry, but once you go down and down and down, you'd hit the water table. And that's why they're here. This is the stuff they wanted. Not this stuff, but fresh water. That's the whole reason this was being dug. Get some of this out.
So, according to Mike Allen, it's a Bronze Age well. There's very good evidence that the downland above was grazed by animals in the Bronze Age, which supports Mike's claim. The next step in our investigation will be to try to locate where in the landscape the shaft was dug and how far inland it was 3,000 years ago. With more recent stories, like the Amsterdam disaster, we have the advantage of good written records. Charlotte and I are visiting the East Sussex Record Office to look at some letters written to John Collier. In 1749, Collier was Surveyor General of Customs. The ship's hold contained fine silk, wine and chests of silver coins.
So he was very interested.
It was Collier's job to ensure they were safely unloaded and the customs duties paid.
This letter is from a town clerk called George Ward. He talks about the beaching of a Dutch East Indian ship. I believe they will save everything that is worth saving, to the great disappointment of the wreckers who come from all parts of the country for plunder. There was yesterday, where I was, more than 1,000 of these wreckers with long poles and hooks. Word spread pretty fast then, if you think about it already. So just the village grapevines were obviously on fire and they're just
swarming the poor ship.
swarming in. But all the soldiers on the coast are there and behave well at present. They keep the country people off and their officers keep the soldiers to rights.
But they've got soldiers in to hold back the thousands of wreckers that have come down with their poles.
At present. It's those sort of little asides like that which I think conjure up nice images, yeah.
Skip forward a month to the 5th of March, a gentleman called William Thorpe writes to John Collier. Now, William Thorpe was the mayor of Hastings, so he's having to deal with all these people that descended upon him. The treasure of the ship, amounting to near £30,000 value, being sent to London, has eased us of a company of foot who were the greatest thieves I ever knew. Dutch soldiers and sailors robbed their officers, as did too many of our own town. God, just everyone's at it.
Everybody was out for themselves, weren't they? And then the PS at the end is the best bit, really. The wine is French. If you would have any, please do let me know. I fancy about £1 a bottle will be the price. So it seems that nobody is above profiting from the
Amsterdam's misfortune.
Yes.
These letters provide fascinating details about the open looting that went on before the Amsterdam sank into the beach. Within weeks, there was no hope of refloating her. And that remains the case today. So we're still to find out what she looked like. The English Channel has been one of the busiest shipping lanes in Europe, right back to the Middle Ages and beyond. That has made the ports on the south coast of paramount importance. Rye was crucial for trade and defence, and so was its neighbour, Winchelsea. And we get a sense of the nation's dependence on the courage of these coastal people and their commitment to the sea from the town's magnificent church.
This is the church of St Thomas the Martyr in Winchelsea. Back in the 1300s, it was much larger than it is now, a cathedral in scale. And it also has some ship graffiti.
Ship graffiti are usually quite crude drawings, often etched into stonework. They continue to fascinate and puzzle historians because there are numerous theories about what they mean.
Oh, gosh. This surface probably would have been painted, so it would have stood out really clearly.
Wow.
And what's the sort of date range for this?
Well, it can't be any earlier than the late 13th century because, as far as we know, the church wasn't being built before then. Probably relates to the heyday of Winchelsea as a port, so 14th century.
Well, that ties in very well with the structure of the vessel, I must say. It does look like a timber-planked vessel with a single mast. It certainly looks like a medieval vessel of 14th century date, thereabouts.
Drawn by somebody who knew ships.
Drawn by somebody who knew ships, and also the height it's carved at is the height of a penitent man, as it were. This could be a memorial to a ship that sunk at sea with its crew, and therefore, as that phrase is, they have no grave but the sea. But the family of those people have inscribed this here as a vernacular memorial to the deceased.
The person who did this, were they allowed to? Was they coming in and graffitiing up the walls of the church countenance stuff?
Yeah, it appears to have been accepted and acceptable in churches, not just here, but across the country. We can see that people were coming in. They're not hidden away here. We're not in a sort of dark corner of the church. We're very close to the altar, and we're right on view.
And why not? If you consider that the person who made this inscription was presumably paying tithes to the church, that is to say, 1/10 of their income, you're paying your money, and those who have lots of money can have an elaborate memorial. If you don't have the money for an elaborate memorial, why can't you simply inscribe a memorial on the wall? It's not graffiti, it's a vernacular memorial.
The evidence in the church has made me realise how vital the sea and ships were to local people's lives. That's one reason why they persisted with the building of the new harbour for Rye. After 63 years of construction, it opened in July 1787. Then, in just 16 weeks, it silted up irreparably. It remains one of the great engineering follies of the 18th century. At the archives, Charlotte is joining long-term Rye resident Joe Kirkham to understand how it could have failed. One of the consultant engineers was John Smeaton. He planned to stop the harbour silting up by uniting the three rivers around Rye and using their combined power to wash or scour the silt back out to sea.
Smeaton came in. It's unfortunate it's called Smeaton's Harbour, and I think it's a great shame he's blamed with the failure, when in fact he was brought in to advise, and he only came once, drew a plan, and his suggestion probably would have worked.
That's right, because what's really nice is that we're able to have a little look at his plan. And we can see on here, look, there's his plan to redirect the River Rother, to come down here and to join up with the Tillingham Channel, and then down here to the Bree Channel, so that the power of these three rivers is going to be strong enough
to scour.
To scour, OK.
And the aim was to cut north of Rye, but in the end, they didn't do this northern cut.
No.
They came round here, and as you know, it was only open for 4 months when the people of Rye realised their old harbour was better than this one.
The actual residents of Rye themselves even wrote a petition, didn't they?
Yes,
saying...
It is with the utmost concern your petitioners have for some time past observed how very much the mouth of the new harbour has been filling up with beach. To that degree
that no vessel of 9 feet water draft can come in without the utmost hazard of losing both the vessel and cargo. So even the people of Rye themselves were saying, it's not working.
I'm sure that's right.
We can see now in the minutes, jumping ahead to the 6th of November, the said harbour is now totally inadequate to the purposes of navigation and sewage and not capable of being made so, and that the ancient harbour of Rye, though now deprived of all the land water, is a more safe and commodious harbour for shipping than the said new harbour.
So, from the 14th of July then to the 6th of November, they were the only 4 months that it opened out to the sea at what is now Winchelsea Beach.
So we now understand what may have gone wrong. By diverting the River Rother south of Rye, they weakened the force of the water reaching the harbour. We're still awaiting the results of our drone survey, which hopefully will show us what the harbour looked like in its brief heyday. Meanwhile, the other puzzle we're wrestling with is the original location of the shaft at Burling Gap. Oliver wants to establish what the coastline used to look like in the Bronze Age. James Cole and Hannah Wood from Brighton University have carried out a laser scan, which enables them to fix an accurate distance between the shaft and the cliffs to within 3 millimetres. Armed with that, they can then locate the shaft on a series of historical maps.
So we've got a hugely accurate scan of the foreshore and the feature. Let's start, if we can, going back in time, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. OK, so the first one that we're going to look at is the 1943 to 1995 mapping series. So 1970 really is kind of that midpoint. And what that's going to show us is this new cliff line, which I'll just highlight here in pink. And we can see our feature in red right on that cliff line.
OK, so the 1970 date, that's roughly when we get the first exposure of the shaft, when we have that fantastic image of it in section. I mean, can we go yet further back?
We can. Let's go back now we'll look at the 1924 to 1951 series. So here you can see, here's the blue of our modern day cliff line. That's the pink from the 1970s. Here we have the cliff location from that 1924 to 1951, and I'll just highlight it there. And that's about 26 metres from the edge of that cliff to our feature.
Wow, that's a huge distance. Have you been able to model it in 3D?
We have, yes. So we've got this blue area here, which is the projected cliff line. So you can see how far out it's moved.
So that's from the feature to the cliff edge. Correct. 26 metres in around 1924.
Yeah. So if we sort of average out that rate of erosion, it's about 0.5 metre a year. So if we project that back to the Bronze Age, that ends up being something like 2 kilometres.
3,000 years ago, the land was up to 2 kilometres further out than it is today. Unquestionably an inland feature. And from Mike Allen's evidence, it's very likely the shaft was a well to water grazing animals in the late Bronze Age. The scale of erosion on this coastline is, at times, breathtaking. It's possible that future storms and erosion will reveal the buried parts of the Amsterdam. But in the meantime, it's been frustrating not to be able to excavate the site and find out what's still in the hole to see what the ship looked like. But that's about to change. Charlotte and I have travelled to the National Maritime Museum in Amsterdam, where, in the early 1980s, as part of an employment project, a group of 400 volunteers built a replica of the ship. And here it is.
Oh, wow. Look at that, it's huge.
The reconstruction is painted in much the same colours as the original, and its length matches, 44 metres. But some alterations have been made to accommodate visitors. The cargo hold would have had a much lower ceiling, and the crew's working and living conditions would have been far more cramped. Having seen the remnants of what's left of the Amsterdam in Sussex, one of the most striking things about being on here is actually getting a sense of how much is still in the sand. Because when you stand outside and you see this enormous vessel, that's a lot of ship, a lot of stuff that could still be down there. And then you also start to imagine what would have been back in just after it beached, it was sunk into the sand. All of this would have been sticking out the top.
But imagining that she would have had in the region of 330 people, crew, soldiers, passengers, 3 women as well, that suddenly doesn't make her feel like such a big ship anymore.
No, particularly when you add on to that cargo.
Yes, cargo.
An awful lot of cargo.
Oh, 1/3 of the ship's floor is covered with cargoes.
Just for me, like looking at the galley, seeing how small that was, well, it helps to get a feel for the place, the smell of it as well. I mean, actually walking into a vessel...
The smell is far too good.
This is a much more pleasant smell.
Just imagine 300 men who didn't wash themselves for 9 months, sweating, peeing, vomiting,
pretty bad.
eating cheese. We were Dutch, so eating cheese with 30, 40 degrees, it's terrible. Well, 26 years.
Since I'm in Amsterdam, I'm taking the opportunity to see what finds Jerzy Gawronski has from the excavation he made of the ship in the 1980s. Absolutely exquisite.
Things like this is silk.
Presumably some kind of stylish piece of fashion wear in the 18th century. What would they wear? It's like a rosette or something.
Yeah, that's exactly one of the fascinating things of excavating a Dutch East Indiaman. It's not about only nautical stuff and warfare, but it's also about a cross-section of European material culture, of stuff which was used in daily life in Europe, and in this case in Amsterdam.
Yeah, cheek by jowl with something a lot more militaristic.
And what you have in your hand is the inside of a cartridge case of the musketeers. They had the standard equipment, and this is the finished product.
Wow. Is that a reconstruction?
No, this is completely real as we found it, and we found 12 together.
Yeah.
It's a package, it came straight from the shop. What happened is that the supervisor of the Dutch East India Company went to that shop, said, here, miss, you have 200 copper casings, and you supply the belt so the musketeer can tie it around his waist. So through the ship, you get into the shop where this thing was made. And that's the amazing thing about the Amsterdam. It's not only about the ship, it's multi-level. Partly related to the Dutch East India Company and the ship as such, but for a larger other part, to the city of Amsterdam, where all the supplies came from. And then on the highest level, Amsterdam in that period was a hub, a central point of a vast network linking all different regions of Europe into the center. This ship is encompassing Europe, and this ship was sailing to the other side of the world. So it is also bringing these European items into a global network.
The dangerous quicksand around the Amsterdam means there's no short-term prospect of raising her. But one day, it might happen. If it does, Jersey's find suggests that everything in the hull will still be intact. A moment in time, beautifully preserved in the intertidal zone. Well, just in are some new results. Pete Rokeslow has completed his drone survey of Smeaton's harbour.
So, this looks familiar. Was there anything you spotted on the drone survey that we didn't manage to see, with our own eyes when we were walking across?
Oh, yes, because this is such a high-resolution image, we can derive a very high-resolution height model from that image. If you look very carefully into this area here, there's a very faint indent in there.
I can just about see it. It's not super
clear. Try and pick it out with a contour, if I get it in the right place. There we go.
Oh, yes. So the deepest section of the field here could potentially be the edges of the harbour as was, but it also potentially could just be the deeper section of a much wider harbour where silt was accumulating on the sides.
Have since silted up.
Yeah.
And how does that fit with the bits of pier that we can still see poking out of the sand?
Right, well, that is a very interesting question because there was a report done in 2002 which provided a plan of this whole area. We have the highest points of the wooden pier structure going up to the actual masonry part.
So there was some masonry there as well?
Yeah.
And that was in 2002?
That was visible in 2002.
You can't see that at all now.
We do have some nice alignments going on between the edge of the stone walls and this line running up here.
Yeah.
That's pretty close.
The timber here running up there.
Yeah,
that looks very close.
So that's it then?
Yeah, the width of that's 50 metres across there, that distance along there. So.
What was the distance on the entrance?
That's narrowing down to 30 metres.
So we have the channel, we have it narrowing towards the end, and as we know, that was done to increase the flow of water and to push out that sediment to keep the channel open. But, look at the challenge that they face. We've got this fantastic map here. Look at this spit that's developed. This is only 10 years after the harbour was closed.
So it's been completely blocked by a natural sand spit.
Yeah.
So they didn't stand a chance, really.
They were up against it. They really were.
In the end, the success or failure of the harbour was about a contest of power. Could the power of the river water they directed into the harbour ever be enough to beat the tidal silt? John Smeaton thought it was possible, but then they didn't stick to his advice. The more I've seen of this coastline, the more I've realised that what the people who have lived here over the centuries have learnt to live with is constant instability. The combined effect of silting up and cliff falls has been that most human-made creations don't last, unless, that is, they're lucky enough, like the Amsterdam, to sink from view under a blanket of protective sand and silt. Generally, though, change is the order of the day, reminding us how the sea gives on one tide, and on the next, it takes away.